event as part of this year's National Trust Heritage Festival. This year is the theme Rediscovering. I'm Aki Vanoptrop, the president of the Walter Burley Griffin Society. It's a long one. We are very grateful that Glenean School so generously gave us the use of the Marion Mahoney Griffin Hall to put on this event. And it was actually fantastic how they assisted us, and especially Margaret and Mary. I want to mention them. I don't know if they are here. This afternoon, we focus on rediscovering the Griffins Castlecrag, the people and places in the 1930s and 40s. A panel discussion about Castlecrag at that time. And the discussion will actually cover many, many subjects like landscape, children play, community, and many, many more. As part of the event, Adrian Cables worked very hard to put a special slideshow on, together of a recently discovered collection of photographs taken by Hannah Newman in the 1930s. She's actually going to talk a bit more about the topics, and she also will introduce the members of the panel. So please welcome Adrian.
VIPs. We've got 4 at our table and 4 sitting close by in the front row. But first of all, I would like to introduce our convener.
Yeah, grab a mic.
It's hard to hear you.
Yeah.
My voice.
Thank you.
It's on. It's on.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I'd like to introduce our videographer at the back here, who's recording today's event so we can put it onto the website. So it's a very important event, so it's wonderful that it can be recorded. Thank you. But first of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Anne Watson. We're very, very fortunate today. She's going to be our convener. And of course, Anne is the most wonderful person who did so much research and editing and writing for our book, Visionaries in Suburbia, which we have on sale today and was launched just late last year. So thank you, Anne. Anne was formerly Curator of Architecture and Design at the Powerhouse Museum. Areas of specialisation include the 19th and 20th century furniture, history and design, 20th century architecture, and particularly the work of Walter Burley Griffin and Marion Mahoney Griffin.
Just. I think you need.
It says it's on. Is that better? Thank you. She has written and lectured widely on design and curated numerous exhibitions, including Beyond Architecture, Marion Mahoney and Walter Burley Griffin, 1998, Mark Newson, Design Works, in 2000, and Utsen's masterpiece, the Sydney Opera House, Utsen Centre in Denmark, in 2008. Her publications as content editor and contributing author include Beyond Architecture, Marion Mahoney and Walter Burley Griffin in America, Australia and India, 1998, and Building a Masterpiece, the Sydney Opera House, 2006. And recently finished her PhD in the Faculty of Architecture at Sydney University, focusing on the work of Utsen's successor, Peter Hall. And importantly for the Society, she did that major lion's share of the book for us just recently. Thank you, Anne. Now, to introduce our panel members, on the right here we have Ivor Morton. Thank you, Ivor. Ivor and his delightful, wonderful wife, Deirdre, have come from the Blue Mountains, especially for us today. They don't often trek out of the Blue Mountains, but we're very lucky that they've travelled down today. Thank you. Ivor spent his first years in a Griffin house in Clifton Gardens, the Vanderlei House. And there's a section in our book about the Vanderlei House that Anne researched. And then when he was a 3-year-old, He moved to Castlecrag and lived in one of the very early cottages, not designed by Griffin, but the one, there's two of them up near the shops in the parapet, and Ivor lived there with his family for 3 or 4 years, but made return visits afterwards. Deirdre was born Deirdre Maddox to Eula Maddox, who was living in Castlecrag in the Wilson house, a Griffin house, in the Barbette. Deirdre, even when she left Castlecrag as a youngster, she made many return visits to visit her half-sister Gilda at Pangloss, or now known as Camelot, in the Bastion. Thank you, Deirdre. Next to Deirdre, we have Beatrice Yell, born as Beatrice Hilda, Brett Hilda's eldest daughter, I believe. Thank you, Beatrice. And Beatrice has written, "Our house had been built before I was born, and the crag was full of interesting people. I spent most of my favourite years here. Since becoming a widow, I've become a writer, mainly free verse and Japanese short-form poetry. We spent our childhood playing in the bush, and our parents told us many stories about the griffins." Next to Beatrice is Barry Duncan. Barry is the son of Frank and Annis Duncan, who lived in the Duncan house and in fact commissioned Griffin to design their house for them. Beautiful little house in the Barbette. So Barry spent his childhood in the Barbette at the Duncan house, your father only sold the house in 1988. So the house was built in 1934, and Frank, your father, lived there until 1988. And here in the front row, put your hand up, Gilda, we have Gilda Baraki, who grew up in Castlecrag, and she's the daughter of Guido Baraki and Eula Maddox. So is Peter Rolland. Apologies. Apologies. Oh, what a faux pas. Sorry. And so you're another Castlecrag girl and lived here, and Deirdre often came to visit you and the family at Pangloss, or otherwise known as Camelot. Thank you, Gilda. Next to Gilda, we've got Renata Watkinson. I know Renata very well because she grew up in the house right beside where we live in the parapet. Her parents migrated during the war and before the war. Thank you, Renata. Thank you, fortunately. And you were just 13, is that right, when you arrived? Yes. And so spent your early years at Castlecrag, travelling to Willoughby School, Willoughby Girls.
I went to Sydney Girls High.
Thank you. You can tell I haven't done enough research. Thank you, Renata. But yes, so you've lived here a long time, from 1940 to 1949, so that period that we're covering today. Thank you, Renata.
Returned again and lived here for another 2 years, so in the 50s.
In the 50s. Thank you. And next to Renata, we have Sherilyn Herbert. Sherilyn is the daughter of Roland Herbert, a very key person in the Griffin story. Roland built the knitlocks at the knitlock factory and was in charge of the knitlock factory. And Sherilyn has an amazing wealth of knowledge and understanding of the knitlocks and how they were manufactured and put together. So it's wonderful to have Sherilyn here. Thank you very much. And next to Sherilyn, we have Roger Parks. And Roger says that his family moved into Castlecrag about 1946, and we built the house in the parapet, commencing at the end of the war. Through my mother's connections with a Bohemian society in Sydney and Melbourne, and that group sort of gravitated to Castlecrag. And he's the great-grandson of Henry Parks, and an undiscovered rugby league hero. So I have just one more VIP to introduce, and that is Mr. Lyndon Junger. We're very, very grateful to Lyndon for sharing his grandfather's photos with us, which you will be delighted to see today. So Lyndon's also travelled a long way to be here with us today, and I'm very grateful, Lyndon, and very grateful for the amazing historic record that your grandfather's photos and the great care you've given them through the years have. So thank you very much. Lyndon has also brought with him a autograph book of his grandparents while they were living here in the Moa House. Sorry, I should say that his grandfather was Herman Junger, who was a Leica camera representative here in Sydney and a very keen photographer. So consequently, lots of wonderful photographs. And they lived in the Moa House in the Rampart for about 6 or so years, and Lyndon's brought their autograph book with him, and it has very wonderful autographs from the Griffins and the Fishwicks and a few others. So if you're interested after the event today, you might like to ask Lyndon if you could have a look at the autograph book. But without further ado, thank you very much, Anne. And I'll start. The procedure today is I've put together 2 PowerPoint shows, and I've put them into themes. So the first theme is the landscape, the Castlecrag landscape. The next one is the Griffin buildings. The third is other buildings and the shops. The fourth is the Castlecrag community. And then the Castlecrag community projects, recreation, and finishing up with children's play. Each section has about 20 or so photographs in it, except for 1 or 2 which have fewer than that. But I'll start by showing you the first theme, and if our panel participants want to talk about one of the particular photos, by all means just stop me. Otherwise we'll carry through to the last photo in that theme, and then Anne is going to be our convener and perhaps stimulate some more discussion. Thank you very much. So you can see in the distance the spit, which is a very distinctive aspect of a lot of these photos. Another photo, probably taken from the top of Tower Rock. And this is looking north from the Tower Rock, and that's Edinburgh Road down below. This is looking west across to Willoughby. So you can see the peninsula of Castlecrag is very undeveloped and beautiful bush, and there's Willoughby in the distance. Chatswood probably. And here's another lovely one looking to the spit. Looking across possibly to the Scarp and the intersection of the Scarp with the Bulwark. That's my guess, with the Tower Rock at the top. And I thought this was an amazing photograph of those telegraph poles that the Griffins did not want under any circumstances, but the authorities insisted that they had to have them. The Griffins wanted to put the wires underground, but the authorities told them would be a bad precedent and wouldn't allow them. This is looking down the bastion and the spits in the distance. And I believe this is the end of the barbette, and the big hill to the right is the knoll at Northbridge, and again the spit in the distance. The battlement, and that's Mrs. Emma Junger. And this is the rampart, the beautiful rampart with Northbridge in the distance, and what looks to me like a quarry at Northbridge. This is Turret Reserve, and I love the little bush track in the foreground. Possibly the local residents making their way to Turret Reserve, but also sightseers because it was a popular sightseeing destination. And this is looking down in the mid-distance is Rockley Street, I think, and Northbridge beyond. And Herman Junge also photographed some of the vegetation in great detail, so some flannel flowers and some Christmas bells, all at Castlecrag. And there's the cows at the dairy in the distance, the dairy being where the Castlecrag shops are now, going down into the Northbridge Valley, Warner's Dairy. Some beautiful grass trees at Castlecrag, and in the distance are Northbridge Baths and the knoll at Northbridge. And this is Theo Junge, who spent 6 or 7 of his years here at the Moa House. Theo is Lyndon's father. And this photo I find fascinating because on the tree there are 2 posters, and they're not completely clear, all the writing on them, but the posters proclaim that people causing damage to the trees will be prosecuted. Another lovely one looking to the water through the trees. And this is a beautiful Angophora. So this is the last slide of the landscape section. So I might hand over to Anne Watson.
Right, anybody got any comments? No, it must have been wonderful growing up in Castlecrag and looking at those very early photos with just the wonderful bush and the flowers, the wildflowers, and the proximity to the water and the rocks. Must have really kind of fashioned your love of nature and of, the Australian bush. Would any of you like to talk about that?
Well, I might mention that the trees were not only cleared to build houses. I mean, Griffin left, our house was built with trees virtually right up to the house. But in the times of septic tanks, we were on the lower side of the road and we got the effluent coming down, soaking through the garden, and it killed a lot of the trees. There was too much water for the eucalypts to handle.
Oh, okay. And I seem to remember photographs of your garden showing quite a few exotic plants. Is that because they did better in
they
the...
probably thrived on the...
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
At one time they said that it was impossible to put sewerage through Castlecrag.
Yeah.
But then later on they decided it was possible.
Yeah, funny about that. Ivor, did you want to say something?
Yes.
And then Beatrice.
In my opinion, the dairy of Warner's was on the western side of the Eastern Valley Way. Whilst they had land on both sides of the highway, the dairy was not where the shops were, but further up Edinburgh Road, and below them on the western side was Chinese Market Garden.
Oh, okay.
On the eastern side there was large paddocks with blackberries, rabbits and cows.
And snakes. And did you drink the milk from the cows in the dairy?
I feel sure I did.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure we would have.
Okay, all right. And Beatrice?
There used to be Christmas bells in pockets on the crag, and every year there were rosters of people to police.
Just have to put the mic down towards you.
There used to be clusters of Christmas bells, and every year people would turn up and pull them up and take them home. And Marion and Walter organised patrols to try and stop it, but I don't think there are any left now.
No, what a shame.
Which was lovely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think
Deirdre?
it was also done with Christmas bush too.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just have to, talk into the mic.
I think
Terrible things.
my love that I learned here
Yeah.
of Australian native and Australian bush. We then went on and built a house in the mountains round an Angopher with a native garden on the roof. And I think that's from my early memories here.
Yeah. And I guess climbing trees and all the kinds of things that kids don't do much of these days.
Yeah. I was climbing trees, I think, as soon as I could walk, because I had an elder brother, 5 years older than me, and even he had bone cancer. He lost one leg. He was still climbing trees with one leg, and I was following him around, climbing up the trees.
And did you fall out of them?
Probably did. I can't.
I do know that tree climbing was a great thing to do. We had one tree in the parapet that became known as the monkey tree, mainly because I think everybody could climb it. And I do know that David Guyot, who lives first or second house along in the parapet, they had trees in front of their place, and I know on one occasion he fell out of those trees, broke an arm and had concussion. And that seemed a good thing to have in those days, because you got a ride in an ambulance, which is about as much as I remember.
A rite of passage. Anybody else? Gilda?
I still remember the bush as my playground. I had a very special rock just next to Pangloss, which was my cubby house. Its walls were the egg and bacon plants, and Barry and I used to play there. On Saturday nights, people used to come down the bastion, who were whooping and yelling, and I can remember one morning my mother got up and in terrible anger found that they had picked all the waratahs which were growing in the bush below, and another time some of the trees were ring-barked. There was a special, there was an expert apparently in Castlecrag who did come down and inspect, and as far as I can remember, the trees were salvaged. But I often see Angopher trees and bush and rocks like these we've just seen, although it's not Castlecrag, and I always think of Castlecrag.
When I see photographs like this, I always think of the drawings that Marion did of the local bushes, particularly the Angopher trees, and how much she sort of captured their spirit. So it's fantastic to have these photographs to remind us of all of that. Anyone else? Nata.
Well, when we arrived, we had come from Germany, and this was a very strange country for us. My mother and I hated the bush. I hate to say it, but it's true. So coming to Castlecrag seems very odd, but I'm very pleased to say that we grew to love it because of Castlecrag. Living in the parapet and having that wonderful view really started us off in getting to know the Australian bush. But in the beginning, it was so foreign and so difficult that we felt terribly sort of difficult with it. But looking at it now, I realize just how beautiful it all was. And I came here, of course, when I was 13, so I never did the childish play. And life was very, very earnest, and I had to knuckle down to learn English, first of all, and straight into high school. So you can imagine, I didn't have much time to look at my surroundings. I had to do, like most migrant children, the onus was to do well. And I'm pleased to say, yes, I did. But so that's my memory of those early days, learning English. And we were enemy aliens, so we couldn't leave the suburb without permission. We had to report to the police station in Chatswood once a week. And for an adolescent, that wasn't a good time.
No, that...
It was very, very difficult. We had several house searches by the police. We weren't allowed to have a radio. So, yes, those early years in Castlecrag were a mixed blessing.
And can I just ask, I mean, that was so interesting. Can I just ask how the Castlecrag community kind of, did they embrace you, or
Oh,
was
yes,
there...
well, my parents really fitted in. We came here because of the Duncans. When my parents arrived, they had been walkers and hikers, and thanks to mutual friends with the Duncans, my parents were introduced to Annis and Frank, and it was they who told us that there was a house that was being let. And if we were at the estate agent on Monday morning, first thing, we would get it. So that's how we got into the parapet. And some years later, the house belonged to a Hong Kong Chinese. And he died, and his sons decided they wanted to sell it. And so, with the help of Ern Claridge and the Duncans and various other friends, my parents, who weren't allowed to own property, managed to find someone to buy it on their behalf, and that's how we actually got the house, and we were naturalized 5 years after our arrival. And after that, I think my father could get the title. And of course, my mother became a fixture in Castlecrag and managed to live in a Burley Griffin house till 96. I think it was the most unchanged Griffin house when she died. I believe it has been changed a lot now. But certainly, looking back, I realize how lucky we were to land here.
Yeah. Almost by accident, by the sound of it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes. No idea about it.
Yeah.
And most, particularly Jewish migrants, finished up in the eastern suburbs.
Yeah.
And it was because we had friends who lived in Chatswood that we then found a semi-detached in Willoughby first. And after that, thanks to Barry's parents, we moved to Castlecrag. And it was the best thing that happened to us. Because we were included in the community very much. And the community during the war years was something else in Castlecrag. Lots of parties, I can tell you that.
We are talking about parties later.
Sherilyn, have you got any reminiscences?
My father came to Castlecrag in 1926 with the help of Walter and Marion. He already had a brother living in a house that must have been one of the very first houses. It was the last house on Edinburgh Road on Torquay Point. Later, the neighbour was the gingerbread house. And Edgar Herbert became very friendly with Walter, and when he went to America to study in Springfield University, Walter asked him, did he have a brother? And my father came to Sydney in 1926 and lived with the Griffins for some time and learnt all about the knitlock that Walter was so familiar with, having designed the machines. And then he found a room in Windsor Road in a 2-storey house and lived there. And he stayed here and worked, and he loves trees. My father has taken more photographs of trees than anything else. And the waratahs, even when I was young and my elder cousin had built a house on the Bulwark, one of the first houses there, everywhere was covered with waratahs. They were just absolutely stunning. And also right down at the point, there were a lot of waratahs. We've always had angophores in our yard when we grew up, even though we didn't actually live here. But yeah, the landscape and the trees and things were very, very special to the area. It's what helped make the area as it is, I think.
And I'm sure had a big influence on you in later life as well, and all of you, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roger?
Postman.
Well, I was a bloke, and all those pictures of the bush around the rampart and around there brings back really good memories, because I'd get home from school and the first thing I'd do is take my shoes off and I'd go running through the bush, and I don't think I'd put my shoes on again till Monday morning. And it was just wonderful to be able to. We used to run down to the Northbridge pool, go right down through the gully, and all that sort of thing. And we weren't always nice. We used to have gang fights with the Northbridge chaps, and I'd like to let you know that we won. We were very good.
Thank goodness.
It was a lovely place to wander, and well, it's just lovely photographs, and I enjoyed that as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next. Want to move on to the next one?
So the next theme is the Griffin houses. This is number 2 dwelling, probably about 1930. And this is the Grand House where the Griffins lived from about 1925 to 35. And I love the little sign on the left which says office, because the Griffins worked out of where they were living in the Grand House for quite a few years. And they also worked out of number 1 dwelling for a while too. This is the other side of the Grand House, the French doors opening up into the view of Middle Harbour. And this photo, I think, shows the Griffin houses so well and how they were sort of dotted in the landscape. The one in the foreground at the left is the Grand House. Down low in the middle is the Moon House. And to the right is the Chung House, where Renata spent her teenage years. So you can see they've all got different frontages to the street and different levels. The Moon House sits down low in the land, and the others on higher land. And of interest to me is the pile of sandstone in the front of the Moon House. I suspect that was perhaps for the garage that was built much later. This is the Chung House. And to the left is, in the distance, is Northbridge Knoll. And this is a view from below, looking up at the Chung House on the left and the Moon House on the right. And that beautiful, beautiful rock, where I haven't quite worked out where that rock is, whether it's in Lookout Reserve or whether it's on the other side of the street. We're not sure. We'll have to do a bit of investigation. Maybe it's underneath one of the houses. And this photo is from Renata and her family. It's of the wing that was the sun trap, as I remember Friedel called it very fondly, designed by Hugh Burrick for them. What year was that, Renata? In the 40s. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. And here's another one from Renata, showing the Chung House and the sun trap at the left, and moving right around through the Moon House and then the Grant and the Johnson House, all in the parapet. This is another one with the Johnson House, slight pitch roof to the right off the photo, the Grant House where the Griffins were, and then the Moon House and the Chung House on the far left. And looking along the battlement towards the Moon and the Chung houses. How different it is today. This is the Felstead House in Edinburgh Road, and you can see it's built of nitlock, and the roof has nitlock tiles too. And it's very pretty windows. And this is from the street, the same house, the Felstead House, looking through the gate. A view of the Spit once again in the distance, Northbridge on the right, and there Castlecrag in the foreground with the Fishwick House on the left. Yes, you can. It's just a very faint shadow above the road leading down to the Spit. Yes, you can. Another view of the Fishwick House from Tower Reserve. Looking down, there's Rockley Street in the mid-distance and Northbridge. And possibly the Harbour Bridge being built, that little lump on the horizon to the left. The Fishwick House, obviously not long after it was completed. And these are some interior shots of the Fishwick House. I love to see that the detailing of the internal stonework, and there's this one of the skylights over the dining room with a beautiful original light, and another shot of the Fishwick House. This is the Barbette with the two Griffin houses, two of the three Griffin houses there. It's the Wilson House on the left, with its small octagonal pitched roof over the living room, and the Cruisewick House and Nitlock House on the right. Another one of the Wilson House with its pitched roof over the living room, and that's where Deirdre was born. And here's Deirdre's mother, Hewlett Maddox, on the other side of the Wilson House. And the bush garden. The Creswick House, its neighbour, built of Nitlock. And another one of the Creswick House with amazing shadows.
It was known as the Seven Lanterns.
Yeah, thank you.
Those things sticking up.
That's where my parents lived. Stand here. Your parents lived there?
My parents lived there for 2 years while Pangloss was being built at 3 the Bastion.
This is the Mower House where the Jungers were living. Herman Junger, the photographer, took the photographs, and his wife Emma and son Theo. And you can see Northbridge in the distance. And here's its terrace roof, and there's a film of a Castlecrag party on the roof. And here's the entrance to the Mower House and its beautiful columns. And here's Mrs. Junger and her son Theo. And this is looking towards the ridgetop, Edinburgh Road. You can just faintly see a tall building in the middle, which is the hospital. And here's another photo, the same sort of view. To the right, I believe it's the Jenkins house, Mr. Jenkins being the engineer who developed Nitlock with Griffin. And sort of hidden behind it is the Felstead house. Then there's the hospital. Here I've labelled them. The Rivette house, the Johnson house, the Moon House and the Chung House, and in the distance, Northbridge. And yes, so I'll hand it over to Anne.
Thanks, Adrian. Okay, any comments in the panel? Talk about the experience of living in the houses, how unusual they were. Did you have friends who came from other suburbs and commented on the strangeness of them?
Well, I think to people outside the crag in the early days, they considered those that lived on the crag were odd, unusual and queer people, like the houses they lived in. Now, our house, while it was Nitlock, what one difference with our Nitlock was that it was the first house built of Nitlock that had galvanised wires as reinforcements. The earlier ones, they had a lot of trouble with concrete cancer, especially the 7 lanterns, I say. In more recent years, they had to chip all those wires out to stop the rust because the face was breaking off. Whereas the tiles of ours, they stayed intact. So, yeah.
Anybody want to talk about leaks?
Well, I have a memory of quite early when we moved in, spending one whole night with a waterfall coming out of the wall, and 3 of us with buckets trying to keep up the pace. And what had happened was that it was a butterfly roof, and the drainage went down the middle of the house through the wall, and somebody had planted a tree outside, and all the roots had gone around the pipe that was supposed to take the water out. So it had banked up, and here we were, quite early in the piece, with this, well, all night it went. And I think that was the beginning of our water troubles from then on. And my husband eventually had nightmares that one day he would be standing in front of a judge because my mother would not let him fix the roof. And it was really, really bad.
Gilda.
Although Pangloss wasn't designed by Griffin because he had already died in India, it was designed by Eric Nichols, and it was very much in the spirit of Griffin's aesthetic. We had a flat roof, and it leaked like mad. There was no, when it was built, there was a great shortage of lead, and there was no flashing between the roof and the stone walls. The ceilings were kyanite, and there were sort of patterns on the ceiling in my bedroom, and I used to imagine, oh, that was sort of Sailor's Bay or something like that, with big stains. It was a leaking house, which was one of the principal reasons that my mother finally decided to leave Castlecrag and we moved to Melbourne. She came home, I tell you,
even more.
She came home one evening and opened the front, it was very wet, opened the front door, and the rain just bucketed down. She couldn't afford to have it flashed, and for other personal reasons, she decided she'd better go back to Melbourne and live at the artist colony at Montsalvat. I went with her.
Thank you. Just wait for the...
There was bubbles on the roof when we Melbourne stuff. You and I weren't allowed to tread on them.
Oh.
Like the bubbles.
But
Is that mic on?
I might mention that the flat roofs, there was, I know my parents rented several of the houses and they all had their individual leaks. And I know my parents would complain to Walter that there's a leak in the roof, and he'd come and have a look, and he'd say, oh, that's only an old one. And my father said that Walter put a lot of faith in God and bitumen. And it was never perfected, the idea of the flat roofs. And our house, the roof drained to the centre. The same thing. It drained to the centre. So it meant that my father, even in his old age, and one reason he sold the house was that he had to climb off on the roof and clear the leaves out of the drains and keep the drains working. Because if too many leaves got in, that blocked the pipe, and you get water oozing in through other places.
Any other leak stories? Maybe we should. What is it Frank Lloyd Wright said about leaks? Not good architecture unless it leaks or something.
That's good.
But I'm interested in the interiors as well, and there's that wonderful shot of Emma and Theo in the mower house with a patterned, multicoloured, looks like tiles behind them in the dining room. Does anyone have any memories of the interiors of the houses? I know, Renata, you had some really interesting furniture that your parents brought with them.
Yes, my parents owned Bauhaus furniture. I don't know if you know what, but I think some of it is still at Adrian's place. The feature of the Chong house is the big living room and the wonderful fireplace. It is a beautiful fireplace, and it actually worked. But also, because Griffin built his houses for the view, we had a magnificent view, like all the parapet houses, of course. But that large room is the gem for that house. It is magnificent. It really is. The kitchen was lousy. Everything else was, but that room made it.
Yeah, all the Griffin houses seem to place emphasis on the living room and not much on the kitchen.
That view got built out.
Oh yes, the house below us was a single-storey house, and that was fine. And then a second story was put on, and we couldn't stop them. And our view went. Where we had seen the spit before, we could no longer see. I don't think we could see the water.
What a shame.
And
Did you complain to council?
Yes,
do you remember?
But we couldn't do anything.
No.
But look, I know my parents tried hard. I wasn't involved in that. I just knew of it.
Yeah.
In those days, councils used to say, you didn't buy the view, you bought the house.
Hello.
Anybody else?
I can just remember that the...
Can you give the...
Oh, here you go.
It's on.
Hello?
Yes,
Here.
it's on.
I can remember that the shops right on the corner of the parapet where we lived just down there, and there were, I think, 4 shops. There was a bakery, and at the bakery they had their horses kept, and I remember on one occasion one of the horses putting on a wonderful show and finally backing himself all the way down the hill beside it, and he didn't do it again. But there were 3 shops there. There was a little grocer shop, there was there was a little grocer. There was a grocer shop, a fruiterer's shop, and the butcher. And down beside the butcher, they had long grey steps going down that were all over covered with cobwebs, and all us kids were quite sure that they kept slaves or something down underneath there. That's all the shops that were there at my time while I was there.
Thank you.
Well, Ivor, we're going to see some photos of the shops just now. So this is one of Herman Junger's photos, and I was so delighted when I saw these, because I know taking people on walks and I tell them about the dairy and the cows and they wouldn't believe me, but here's a photo of evidence. So the building on the left is a Griffin designed shop building, and then the others is what today is called the Griffin Centre. There's the front of the Griffin design one with the association office on the left and the grocer on the right. And unfortunately, that is where the driveway for the quadrangle is today, the driveway going down to the car park. And they're what we call the Griffin Centre shops, back when there were just 4 shops. I think there's actually 5 now. But yes, you're right, Ivor. There's the fruiterer, the caterer, the mercer and the butcher. And that photo is taken from the promotional booklet that the Greater Sydney Development Association did for Castlecrag. And here's another similar photo. Oh yes, sorry, the baker was underneath where the bottle shop is today. That was the baker underneath, you might remember that. Yep.
And the butcher had steps going down to the basement.
The ovens are still there.
Yes, yes. Fabulous, yes. Sherilyn actually had a restaurant in
Next door where the hardware shop was, we had a restaurant there. Thank you. We ran a restaurant at the Crag there, next door to the bottle shop, which I believe was the hardware shop.
Oh, really?
And we had a French restaurant there with about five or 6 years. We were there. We called it Le Crag. My father told me that when they were all younger, everyone that lived right down below, all used to have to walk up to the shops to get the bus, because the bus didn't go down to the top of the pinnacle, is it? In those days. So they had town shoes and walking shoes, and everybody had a box against the wall in the hardware store with their name, family name on it, where they used to keep their walking shoes during the day and then put their town shoes on to go to work. And in the evening it was reversed because they had to walk back down again.
How fabulous. Oh, Sherilyn, thank you for that. Oh. So they're the Griffin Centre shops from the back, and the 2 cottages that are at the end of the parapet, the one behind is the one where Ivor spent 3 or 4 years as a child. And here they are. The one on the left is where Ivor and his family lived. So these houses were approved by Griffin, but weren't actually designed by him.
What was the number of that house in that one you lived in? Is that 32?
Look, I can't remember the number. For some reason I thought it may have been 62.
Because that was where they had the kindergarten during the war.
My mother had the kindergarten.
Yeah.
It was 42.
Adams was there as well.
Yeah,
Cecily Adams.
Cecily Adams.
Yes, she came, I think they came after.
Yes.
So this, I believe, is the Jenkins house. I'd never seen a photograph of it before. And I think it's the one very close to the Felstead house in Edinburgh Road. It's hidden from the street today, and it's not designed by Griffin, but obviously Jenkins built it. And this is the entrance to it on Edinburgh Road. And you see the garage there. And I'm not sure what this is. Is it the garage being built? And does anyone know who that man is? This is the Dean's house, built for Edgar Deans and his family. Edgar Deans was the amazing secretary for the Greater Sydney Development Association, a key person. And he then went on to become mayor of Willoughby Council for some years. This is the knitlock factory in the Rampart, near the corner of the Redoubt. And I knew of the knitlock factory. In fact, Ruskin Herbert had told me about that 20 or more years ago. That's Sherilyn's uncle. But there it is. I think it's probably underneath houses and backyards now. Nothing exists. But Gilda, you remember playing there?
Yeah, Gilda.
Oops.
wasn't there. There was somewhere up the top of the barbette where there was maybe a quarry. May have been a quarry.
Oh, okay.
And there was some old big crane or rusty machinery there. And I remember Barry and I going up there and exploring and playing around. And when we got home, Anna said we're not allowed to go there, and so we didn't. We were told off.
All I remember about playing with Gilda was at about 5-year-old. We were about 5-year-olds, and she said she was going to marry me.
Oh, beautiful.
Barry, I've always been true to you in my fashion.
Might wonder at that.
I'll keep this here now.
This one on the left is the Moa House in the Rampart, and this was such a revelation to me. In the foreground you can see the beginnings of another Nitlock house, but it's not there today, and I believe it was probably never completed. It features in a few of the photos, but this is the one that's revealed the most, so it's tantalising, but not much is there. You can see the Northbridge Baths on the right-hand side in the distance. And this is the hospital, looking from the Swordy Port up to the hospital. And I'm not sure, is this a Hilda house? Beatrice, do you know?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen that photograph.
No. This is the Reeves House in Edinburgh Road, near Tower Reserve. It was designed by Eric Nichols, but unfortunately demolished, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s. And this is a wonderful photo of Edinburgh Road with the Stoker's house in the distance. And we're very fortunate today to have Kathy Stoker amongst us, Kathy Beresford. So she might have some interesting things. And here's the pinnacle where the Stokers lived before they moved to the other house you just saw. And the pinnacle was at the end of the flat part, at the end of the ridge of Edinburgh Road. And you can see the beautiful rock in its foreground. And that house...
Eula and Edgar and we lived in the pinnacle for quite a while.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Wow. When was
and
that?
I remember the possums could climb up in between the roof and the top.
Beautiful. So that was after you left the Wilson house?
After we left the Wilson house.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it was for very long.
Right.
I know I got a new scooter while I lived there.
Oh, lovely. Oh, Deirdre had a new scooter when she lived there. Did you scooter on those rocks or on the road?
I think on the road.
Yes.
But I do
Lovely.
remember out the back of it, and there was a cliff, and some little boy that was there could pee out over the cliff, and I couldn't.
Oh, wow.
Can I say something on the Stoker house? The kindergarten was moved from the parapet, and because the kids were getting too many kids, and they moved them down then to the Stokers. And then when the Stokers got a bit fed up with having 150 kids or something, they decided then to go to the community hall. Now I think if somebody might be able to correct me on all that, but I was talking to Gillian Adams, who lived in the house before you did, and I think one of the reasons also that they had to move was because the army, they used to have tents in the parapet, and when it rained, their tents leaked, so they moved into the house, and so they had to move the children out, so they were saved us once again.
That's fantastic.
That's the last slide in our other buildings theme. And in the foreground is Theo Junger sitting in the car. I think a beautiful roadster, perhaps. And you can see dotted in the bush, there's people sitting on a rock at the left in front of the Pinnacle house. And there's other people over near the light pole, or the telegraph post. So yeah, fabulous photo.
Talking about cars.
Oh, sorry.
Oh. There was a time that there were 3 cars on Castlecrag, and my parents had one of them. Whereas everyone had to walk or whatever. And before Eastern Valley Way went through, there were no buses or trams any closer than Willoughby Road.
Barry, I think Edgar had a car,
Yeah.
and we parked it in your drive, Crosley.
Well, we normally parked it out on the road, our cars out on the road, because invariably they had flat batteries.
Yeah.
And the hill starts were quite common.
Ivor.
I can remember the Duncan's car because it had running boards, as cars did in those days, but it also had a collapsible grille on each side, a little like they have in front of old elevators and things like that, and you could pack things in it. But the Duncans had a dog in one side. I don't remember what the dog was or anything, but I know one side was reserved for the dog.
Probably had a goat on the other side. Because we didn't drink the milk from the dairy. We had our own milk with a goat.
The goat.
Oh,
the goat.
wow.
Annabelle, wasn't it?
Oh, well.
Annabelle.
That brings up food and what you all ate and where you got it from. Did you, I mean, there was a butcher and a baker and a mercer, not that you could eat anything from the mercer, but, you know, there were shops that you could buy food from, but obviously you needed to grow vegetables, for example, or...
There was a vegetable shop on the other side.
But did you have a vegetable garden, or did anyone have a vegetable garden?
There was the Chinese gardens.
Yeah.
My parents during the war had a vegetable garden outside in the Chong house. The biggest problem were the rabbits.
Yes.
And
Still is.
During the war as well, there was, of course, an army camp in the parapet. And my parents felt very safe leaving me at home because there was always a guard outside our house for the army camp. So they never thought that the soldiers might come into this adolescent girl, but they trusted the soldiers to look after their daughter.
And did they?
Well, nothing happened, I can assure you of that.
Gilda.
My mother describes in one of her books, The Devious Being, how a number of babies were born about the same time as me, including Barry, and how they used to push the prams to the Chinese gardens and fill them up with vegetables and take them home. So that's how
And where were the Chinese gardens?
look, I don't remember, but Ivor did describe them early on today.
The Chinese gardens were in the Eastern Valley Way down between Northbridge and Castlecrag.
Oh, okay.
Down in the, it's now,
right.
as I was coming past, it's now this development. But for a long time, when we moved here, there was still a Chinese in the vegetable garden, market garden there.
Yeah.
But we didn't go there to buy our vegetables. We grew them.
My mother was born and grew up in Oakville Road. Her parents had the produce store across the road from the house, just around the corner from High Street. And she used to say that the very big Chinese gardens would stretch from approximately Oakville Road right down to where St Thomas's is, just on the western side of High Street, because that ground there was quite flat compared to a lot of the other ground around. But there was Chinese merchant men that used to come to the house before the First World War, selling wares, all their brushes, their tablecloths, and all of that sort of thing. I don't know whether they ventured into the crag. There was probably very little here before the war, but a lot of that area there was market gardens, and they were Chinese.
And so it was all fairly self-sufficient. You didn't really have to venture anywhere else to do, you know, most of the shopping that you needed to, you know, eat and drink and get by. Was that the case?
Well,
Yeah.
there was a greengrocer shop there in one of those group of 4 shops when we were living there, but the Chinese gardens were still down below, and they had a big dam there that they used to walk through with these big watering cans and go up and down the road. That was their irrigation system. Somebody carried them up and down. There were about 6 or 8 men walking there all day.
Yeah.
I once remember trying to lift up one of the watering cans, but you know, I couldn't even move it on the ground. It was so heavy. They used to wear these yokes, just go through, fill up the watering cans and then walk up to the gardens.
Thanks, Ivor. We move on to the next. Anybody else want to talk about? Bob. Hang on, Jill. We'll go have Gilda first and then Bob.
There was a houseboat in Sailors Bay, and the owner or occupant was known as the name of Wild Bill. Once a week he used to come up Edinburgh Road with a sugar sack over his shoulder and come back again laden with his groceries. He always called by our house and asked if we needed any provisions, and he'd get them for us. I became very attached to Wild Bill, and he used to tease me quite a lot.
Thanks, Gilda.
So the next theme is Castlecrag community, and this is a wonderful photo on the foreshores from the Herman Junge collection. And this is Mrs. Emma Junge and her son Theo with the spit behind. Very stylish and gorgeous. And here again, style on the rocks and the beach. And there's Mrs. Junge in the middle, sitting with Theo at the left, and perhaps 2 friends. I love the Japanese parasol. And the timber steps above, which are obviously very substantial and a well-used foreshore spot. This is on the top of Tower Reserve, another wonderful photo, and the spit in the distance. And this is a photo from Deirdre of herself as a baby with Walter Burley Griffin. And I put this in because of the community gatherings that were held on the roof of the Moa House. It's a good one to see. Then you can see just to the left there's a ramp that you walk up onto it. So it was very easy to get to the roof of the Moa House. And this is gathering at the Wilson House. Norna Morton is in the centre, and that's Ivor's mother. And Anise Duncan is on the right with their sons. And again, the Wilson House, this time with Deirdre, little Deirdre, with her mother, Eula Maddox. And this was the loggia going towards the street. This is Deirdre again with Eric Nichols. And this is Annis and Frank Duncan. They rented the Creswick House before they built their own Duncan House. And here they are on the roof of the Creswick House, the House of 7 Lanterns, as Barry pointed out. And here, this is a lovely photo from the Mortons. And Barry Duncan is in the middle, looking straight at us. Then there's, yes, all the names are down below. Yes, Mari Nichols on the right, Eric Nichols' daughter. And Gilda. Gilda's there, second from the right. It's beautiful. And so this is at Pangloss.
It was probably about that age that she promised to marry.
Oh. Definitely looking very appealing. And that's Ivor's sister on the left. Is that right, Ivor? Carlos. Gilda, did you want to say something?
That little group was part of the rotating kindergarten, which once a week, a mother at their house would have the children for the morning, which gave mothers freed up mothers to do other things, and that's really what that was. But we went to other houses as well, to the Mortons and the Adams and all over the place.
Oh, lovely. Oh, thank you for explaining that. That's great. And here's another photo at Pangloss, the 5 of you again. And I love seeing the bush in the distance there as well. And here's little Gilda with her big sister, Deirdre, or big friend Deirdre.
That was our last Christmas.
Oh.
We called it our last Christmas.
Oh.
Because the Pearl Harbor had just been bombed on the 7th of December, and my mother and Eula decided we would have a special Christmas, our last Christmas, in case it was our last Christmas.
Oh my goodness! Wow. I'm guessing, but I think these are probably sightseers to Castlecrag. There's quite a few of them there, some tucked, hidden behind the trees on the right. And in the distance is the Fishwick House. And the second from left is Mrs. Junger and possibly some friends or Castlecrag people. And I believe that's in front of Turret Reserve, standing on the rampart with Turret Reserve behind. The Yardleys, who lived at number 2 dwelling. Mrs. Yardley with her 2 sons.
Well, Nikki and Michael, that's Nikki on the left and Michael on the right. And Roberta, their mother, at about that age, they were in the film
Bush Christmas.
Bush Christmas. Yeah. And I think it was about the first film I ever went and saw in the Northbridge Theatre. I know the mother thought that Michael would be the lead, but I think with the film, young Nicky was seen as the bigger star, although he was younger.
He stole the show.
Yes.
I think that Christmas. Oh, sorry, Shirley.
My mother had been a writer. She started writing scripts for the ABC, and they took a number of the film people from Early Studios who came out to Australia after the war to make a series of films. They were casting for Christmas at the time, and my mother suggested Nikki and Michael, and they were cast. Roberta was probably my mother's first, very close friend of my mother's, and Edward was their father. Was an actor.
I know that the Christmas after that photo was taken and the film was on, the Christmas card from the Yardleys went out from their children and dependents because they'd earned all the money for the film. The parents were broke.
Oh, this is an illustration that was published in the Castlecrag book. Oh, sorry, Ivor.
There's one thing I remember about that bush Christmas was that on some occasion the children were all lost and they had a native Aboriginal boy with them, and they got to the stage where they were starving and the Aboriginal boy dug up some witchetty grubs and there was a picture of him going to eat one. And eventually he did eat it, but apparently the director or somebody in the film, one of the big people involved, had to eat about 6 before the Aboriginal boy would eat one at all.
So this is an illustration by Bernard Hesling that was published in the Castlecrag book, produced in the I think the 70s, by the Castlecrag community. And Beatrice, I think you've told us or told me that the man holding the umbrella with the beard is your father, is that right? Brett Hilder?
That's right.
Great. And so then there's one of the Yardley boys swinging on the fence, and Ern Claridge is there. The Claridges were living in the Wilson house at that stage, possibly. And Tina Date pulling the billy cart, and Robin Batterham reading the paper at the bottom of the bush.
New States.
Does anyone know who Ern Claridge, who's smoking the cigar, is talking to? That gorgeous-looking girl. So this is a photo from Deirdre and Ivor. I'm not sure if you recognise any of the people in it, Deirdre or Ivor. And so there's a few other photos that you will recognise the children. And this one I loved. It's one of Herman Junger's photos of the different forms of transport, the Chatswood bus and the rider on horseback. And was there one of these public phones at Castlecrag? It's one of Herman Junger's photos, but I don't know whether it was taken here or elsewhere.
There was one at the bus stop.
Oh, really? Really? So do you think that could be that phone? Wow. Well, yes.
Bus stop on the western side of Eastern Valley.
Right. So was the phone on the western side of Eastern Valley Way or on the... Ah, wow. Right. The bus going to Chatswood. Yes. Oh, that's wonderful to know. And an amazing photo of the army on horseback coming up the bastion. And you can see the spit once again in the distance, a distinctive telltale that it's definitely the bastion.
I wasn't allowed to have a cart or anything that may be dangerous on this hill. Although we rode bicycles, one time I had my bicycle brakes fail on this hill, and luckily I was able to swing up one of the driveways on the right.
Wow, I'm glad you managed to do that.
But I was not allowed to have a billy cart.
Oh, you, in another theme, you will see some billy carts. And, oh yes, please.
Yeah. You want to hear that comment?
In the winter, in June of 1942, an army group arrived and camped in the reserve above the car's boat shed. First, my mother sort of ignored them, and then, but when it poured with rain, she invited them to come and stay in Pangloss because it was empty except for myself and her. And so they arrived, and after that they became great friends. My mother used to go, I used to become their mascot, and I remember there was mouth organ and singing, and they had cups of tea and everything else like that. One evening they were gathered, this is my mother's account, they were gathered round the fire in Pangloss, a group of them, and somebody raced in and said, "We've got orders to move out." Well, they just took off like lightning. "Don't be caught, get back to the camp," they said. So they took off like lightning. And I remember the noise all that night of motorbikes and movement and trucks going up and down, and they left shortly afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
A group arrived shortly after for another month, but then they were all moved up to Queensland and New Guinea.
Amazing. So a group of friends at the Pinnacle. Mrs. Junger is seated, second from right. I don't know if anybody else recognises the other people. I think it's Theo Junger standing at the back, a young Theo Junger. I don't know who the woman on the right is or the man behind her. And this is a community gathering at the Guy House in the Bastion in the mid-1930s. And is seated in the front row is Herman Junger, second at the right, beside Emma Junger and son Theo. And I've just, you can't read them very well, but I've actually labelled them all there. There's two people that I haven't been able to identify. One is the woman at the bottom right, and the other is the man in the back beside Walter Burley Griffin. And Marion Marnie Griffin is there on the right at the back. Yes, Annis Duncan's there, and the Godfreys who lived in number 1 dwelling, the Gyatts who lived in the Johnson house, yes, sorry, I can't read them all now, but Bobs Walker, Eric Nichols, Molly Nichols, George Walker, yes, Molly Nichols is in the middle there with the fur round her neck.
I can remember Beth Guy was a big woman.
She's got the checked collar.
And she had a deep voice. That's what I remember.
Oh, right.
After they sold there, they moved to a farm out
Hornsey.
Yeah, up Hornsey Way. Because I know we visited them at the farm one time. I rode a horse there.
Adrian, the guy in the middle at the back, is that the same guy who's spoken in the cinema ad? Remember that the guy who's dragging away in the yard?
Really?
Looks very similar to him.
Okay. Yes, well, any clues, I'd be very grateful. So we move on to community projects. I've only got a few photos here, but that's a kindergarten photo with Molly Nichols. So that's a lot more than 5 children. So perhaps that was right earlier or later, do you think?
They weren't thinking about health and safety.
And a young Ivor Morton is standing about 2/3 the way in from the right with his finger in his mouth. Is that right, Ivor?
I think so,
I
yes.
was looking, I can't quite work it out, but I think that's right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I haven't worked out what wall that might be.
Anyone know what year this is?
I'd say it was about 36, 37.
On the second from the end, and it's Eula behind. Two, three.
Is Deirdre there? Oh, right. Oh. Right. And another kindergarten shop that Ivor and Deirdre have kindly given to the society, washing up. And again,
that kindergarten was run by my mother in the parapet.
So did she do that 5 days a week or 1 day a week or?
I think so. I can't remember. I know she stopped. My elder brother died, and she stopped completely then.
Yes.
And I think it was not long before he died.
So that photo would be in your garden in the cottage in the parapet?
Yes,
would that be right?
Of
Lovely.
course, I think there's a picture of Gilda there and
yes.
Bronwyn Guy. Don't know that I know the others.
Which one's Bronwyn Guy, Ivor?
Maybe it is, but I think that's Bronwyn Guy.
In the middle?
Not sure, but I think so.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And this is the Castlecrag community laying drains for the community centre.
Right there with the wheelbarrow.
Oh, truly? Oh, Roger, how brilliant. Oh, fabulous. And
Yeah, my father's there.
yes, 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 so, yes, the spade. Yes. Renata, your father Manfred is holding the spade, is that right? Walking to the left. Yes.
He's the one right on the right with the shovel.
Mm-hmm.
That's Manfred. Mm-hmm. Frank Duncan is at the front at the wall.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Any others recognised? I'm glad to see Roger there. You're pushing the wheelbarrow.
I can't remember.
But my father's on the right, I think, of that.
Ah.
And then there's one of the Gillian Adams is the back. She grew up and became the femme fatale of Castlecrag.
Oh.
I always knew I missed my opportunity.
Laying drains.
Yeah.
And this, I believe, is Bimhilda on the left?
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
That's Ken Thomas, isn't it?
Ken Thomas
do you?
and Rawson Deans.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not Bimhilda. Okay, so Ken Thomas on the left.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to relabel that one. So they're
Rawson Deans on the right, yeah.
these last couple of photos are from the Castlecrag book, and then they don't label the people in them, so it's nice to know that's Ken Thomas on the left. Thank you. And just one shot of the Haven Amphitheatre. So, yeah. Are there... And maybe there's some...
Did you all go to performances at the Haven Theatre as children, or?
Everyone had to take part. Marion rounded up everybody into the chorus and whatever. You couldn't say no to Marion. That was it. My mother had to wear a white sheet and come down on cue as an angel. A whole pile of angels came through the bush in one of the plays.
Yeah.
Remember that? Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks, Beatrice.
I can remember only ever going to one performance down there, and there seemed to be a lot of carrying on and yahooing and so forth. I don't remember it being a very exciting adventure as far as I was concerned, but I am quite sure that Marion was dressed up in, I think, black with a big long black hat, and I thought she was a witch, and she's always been a witch to me ever since.
Yeah, it all looks very serious in this photograph, and obviously they've gone to an enormous amount of trouble with the costumes and the sets and the lighting, and yeah.
So we'll move on to the next theme, which is recreation, and I'm aware of the time, so we might go quite quickly. So Sailors Bay with the Castlecrag and the boat sheds on the right, and Northbridge Baths and Northbridge Beyond. One of the boat sheds at Castlecrag. And canoeing, that's Theo Junger canoeing, and some others with their gorgeous hats, and on a sailing boat. And here, the sailing boat pulls into what I think might be baths and a tidal pool at the end of Castlecrag. You can see the spit in the distance again, locating it. And here's another photo of the same location with the tidal baths on the right. And high tide at those same baths, people swimming. I think that might be Emma Junger on the left.
I was never allowed to go swimming in the harbour because of sharks. Looking up the records, there've been, when you think of the size of Middle Harbour compared with the rest of the harbour, there have been more people killed by sharks in Middle Harbour. And when you take the total area, it's only a very small part of the total harbour, but yet there have been something like a dozen, 9 or a dozen shark deaths in Middle Harbour, and about 29 or something altogether in the Sydney Harbour.
Oh, really? Okay. So the tidal pools were important aspects. And here's Mrs. Junger on the left with a friend and Theo Junger having a lovely picnic. And the Middle Harbour Ferry was going there in the 30s. The spit in the distance again. And you can see the ferry in the distance in this shot, and closer at Castle Cove, the ferries. And I think that was a destination for leisure and recreation. Here is that wharf, I believe, at Castle Cove. And someone diving off into the water. They're not afraid of the sharks. And this is down near the end of Edinburgh, the ridge, the end of Castlecrag Ridge, Edinburgh Road. Once again, spit in the background. And I love this photo because the sign to the left above the gate says Wildflower. So that's the Hilda House Wildflower. Obviously, Theo Junger with very proudly holding his bike. It looks like a brand new bike. And a nice picnic spot, probably at the end of Rockley Street. And the end of Rockley Street with a shed there.
There was a shelter shed there, and I think when the army used it, they boarded it in.
Oh, right.
There was a shelter shed.
Cricket. Playing it on the road. And that's Mrs. Junger playing tennis at Castlecrag, 1930s. And I don't know whether this is recreation or mending, but I thought it was a wonderful photo. I just had to include it. Haven't worked out what street it is. So children's play, that's at the Wilson House, and it's an upside-down rocking horse. A lovely photo from the Mortons of Ivor's mother, Norna, and sister Carlos, and Ivor's father, Harold, with Ivor standing behind him and his sister Carlos in front. Their house with their cubby house. It looks like a cubby house to really die for. the tall part of the right-hand side. And here's Ivor with Jennifer Bennett inside the cubby house. And this is Deirdre at the Grand House on her tricycle. That's possibly after the Griffins had left Castlecrag, perhaps. Deirdre?
I don't really know that.
You don't know who the woman would be there?
Who's the woman? I don't know.
And a billy cart. Ivor and little sister Carlos on the billy cart. And another billy cart, that's Theo Junger, putting the pet dog. And Theo Junger with his beautiful construction of timber blocks. And on the roof of the mower house, playing with a tennis ball on a pole with Northbridge in the background. And I wonder if anybody of you recognise what that big building in Northbridge is on the skyline. Would that be the movie theatre or the Masonic Centre?
Church.
The church? Okay. All right, good. And Theo Junger again, from the ramparts of the mower house. And a tent outside the mower house garage. And here's young Ivor Morton with his arms folded at his birthday party.
Got you now.
Well, that could be my brother Ross in the middle, at the front.
Oh, really? Okay.
There.
Do you think it's Ross?
Yes, I think that's Ross. And I think the Indian above is definitely Bronwyn Guy. But the other ones, I don't know who they are.
Mm-hmm. And that would be in your garden?
Yep.
Yes, lovely.
I remember it anyway.
And the same party, same Indians. David Guyot, is he the one climbing up the downpipe?
He was a great climber.
And there on the fence. That's your home again, yeah.
Would have been an illegal fence.
Absolutely.
Yes. But to keep the cows out, because the dairy was so close by.
Well, my parents looked out one day and found a horse on our lawn. It's only a small lawn, but there was a horse from somewhere grazing on the lawn.
And this is the last photo of beautiful photo with Ivor's sister in the middle with a scooter, Carlos, and all sorts of wonderful vehicles there.
So that's all the photos. Anybody got any memories they'd like to share about playing at Castlecrag? I think so too. One thing that strikes me is how, sort of free everybody looks. Free and happy, and the toys are very simple, but obviously, you really enjoyed your play and there was plenty to do and there were lots of kids to play with, and that interaction was really important to your childhood.
Well, the children had to entertain
a child in those days, I can assure you.
You had to entertain yourselves. Children in those days didn't have electronic things to entertain them. They had to find their own entertainment, like climbing trees and rocks and things.
And using your imagination a lot too, playing games. Yeah.
Cubby houses.
Right. I think that's it. You're really cold, are you?
Not anymore.
Oh.
Thank you.
They're all
You did-
shivering here.
You rescued me.
I'll turn this off.
So on the morning walks, we spoke about sort of the advantages of free-range child rearing, and I guess our expert panel are living proof of the healthy benefits of that.
Well, thank you very much to all our participants today. It's been a wonderful revelation, all those fabulous memories that you've recalled for us and enlightened us. I think that together with the images, it sort of has revealed so much more about Castlecrag and the community than we would have otherwise known. So thank you very, very much. And Ivor.
Yes. If I could have just one moment, I would like to acknowledge the native population that looked after this country for so many thousands of years. I can remember as we did our bushwalks as kids, we used to say how much they must have loved this area, and I couldn't agree more, and thank them very much.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you very much, Ivor, indeed.
You need a bit of sugar, I think. Thank you very much.